Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm hilary.salt.
And I'm Sebastian.moore.
And we have a bit of a mixture of an episode today, don't we? So you've just come back from another conference.
I have.
So
We've been doing lots of conferences recently. So I attended Living Freedom Summer School.
Looks fantastic.
Which it was fantastic. I was so impressed. So we interviewed Alistair Donald on the podcast a few months back.
We did.
He advertised it. And it's a chance for young people, so 18 to 30-year-olds, to listen to talks by various public intellectuals, I suppose you could call them.
Yes.
And then to contribute and to discuss some of the topics. So I'll give you a little taste of the things we discussed. So the first evening we talked about the vibe shift, which you and I have talked about before.
Yeah.
And how that sort of manifests itself in our politics, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
That was Jacob Reynolds who gave a talk on that.
Yes.
And I think what was really good about Living Freedom is that it was very participative and very interactive. So a lot of these conferences that we go to, I think they can be very much somebody giving a talk and then everybody just listening to them. And you might be able to ask a question. But this was anybody that wanted to speak spoke. And it was a real back and forth. So it wasn't just a talk and then questions. It was a round of questions. The speaker would kind of give a bit more of some responses to those questions, and then it would go back out to the floor, which enabled discussions to be fleshed out a little bit more.
Good.
I'll give you a few others. So we had a guy called Jacob Phillips, another Jacob, who wrote a book called Obedience is Freedom. He talked about the culture of narcissism.
Okay.
Which is a book by Christopher Lash. Then you had History of Hate Speech Laws. Frank Ferretti talks about what makes you a citizen.
Wow.
And I said, I wonder if we're over intellectualizing this a little bit, because I think Frank's quite intellectual. And he said, every time somebody says, we might be over intellectualizing, I reach for my metaphor gun. And I understood his point that that's sort of a pointless concern, because how would you know? And in order to know, you'd have to intellectualize it. So it's sort of a vicious circle. But I do think, and certainly with what makes you a citizen, we could be here all day. There's no perfect answer. Whereas I think it's the sort of thing that in reality, you can ask somebody, are you a British citizen? And they'll be able to tell you whether they are or not. Then you can kind of move on from there. And I also made a point that Peter Ramsey has made, which is that he often says it's less about who we are and more about what we do.
Yes.
Which I think is a much more pragmatic answer to that question.
Agency.
Exactly. Ben Cobley, who we had on the podcast, he gave a rebuttal to Austin Williams about the Greens being the new neo-colonialists.
Oh, okay.
And that, honestly, I think that would be the one that stuck with me as probably the most interesting discussion, because it was a discussion about environmentalism, right? And yet it wasn't reduced to just saying, we're all going to die, climate change is going to kill us, and we've got to stop using things. And it was actually a lot more interesting, a lot more in depth, and some very really well-made points. And I would say for the conference as a whole, I felt that it really would hold up to anything else out there in the public sphere. You take BBC Question Time as an example.
Yeah.
Right. This was 10 times better in terms of the breadth of discussion and the breadth and depth of discussion.
Great. Yeah. And in your news item, you want to talk about something that was maybe breaking news whilst you were there.
Exactly, yeah. So this has been all over the news the past few days. The comments that an artist made on the stage at Glastonbury.
Yep.
And Claire Fox, again, who's been on the podcast.
Yes.
Everybody in this conference has been on the podcast.
Not quite everybody. I think we've got a list of future guests.
Few more to get. She actually broke this story as we were sitting there, which is quite interesting because it was a real life example for some of the topics that we were discussing surrounding freedom and free speech.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to talk about that
Okay.
after your news item.
Yes. So I don't want to do this massively in depth because I just wanted to give a bit of an update on the issues around disability benefits, or PIP as we call it. So people might have noticed that yesterday, we're recording this on Wednesday, so yesterday, Tuesday, the government effectively backed down on almost all its changes to personal independence payments. So we talked about this on a previous episode, and I don't want to rehash what we said then. So if people are really interested in this topic and they've not heard that, go back and listen to that. But so I wanted to kind of concentrate on the update. Mm-hmm. And I guess there's 2 points about the update that I thought were quite important. So the first is that it really did look like government was very much unjoined up. So I've said before, haven't I, that I feel that Rachel Reeves's chancellorship is all based on let's find an answer that makes the spreadsheets work. So the kind of goal-seek chancellor is what I've called her. And it did feel that the changes that had been proposed to disability benefits were very much about the money. But then it was left to Liz Kendall to rationalise and, give a political argument for why they were doing it. And to be absolutely fair, I thought Liz Kendall put up quite good arguments. So one of the things she said in the House was, it's not compassionate to just leave people drawing disability benefits with no way to get, to make their lives better. And I think she really believes that. So it felt really awful that she was kind of partly thrown under the bus when the Prime Minister effectively backtracked on all these changes during the course of the discussion in Parliament, really.
Just to pick up on the thing you said about Rachel Reeves being about, she's looking at the spreadsheets and trying to figure out the right answer, and the distinction between that and maybe what Liz Kendall is doing, which is making a political argument for it. Just going into a little bit more depth in that, would I be right in thinking you're saying that Rachel Reeves might be looking at it, assessing the situation as it is, whereas you're advocating for politicians to be a little bit more insightful in terms of the decisions they make actually affect the actions of people?
I think there's 2 issues that really, I think the point I was trying to make was that Rachel Reeves just seems to be saying, here's a number, well, if we do this, we'll generate these savings. Whereas Liz Kendall was then expected to say, the reason we're addressing disability benefits is to address the real life situation of these people and for these political reasons. I think that's one issue. The second issue, which I think you're hinting at, is one of the issues that comes up a lot with the OBR, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility. So quite often, and I think Liz Truss made this point quite strongly, that when the OBR look at what the effect of a policy will be, they say, well, if you stop spending that money, this is the savings you'll make. And they don't then say, oh, and those people will then be doing these jobs and that will generate this extra income. So there's a kind of second order effect of changes. And I think that's what you're hinting at. So I think both of those are problems. Okay. Interestingly today, I think everybody saw the human side of Rachel Reeves. She was clearly very, very upset in Parliament. Obviously, we don't know what's gone on in the background there, but it does seem that she's carrying a lot of the can for what was, it seems, a really big misstep on behalf of Parliament. So, behalf of government, I should say. We talked about that Lexit conference we were at last week, didn't we? And one of the guys there made the point that what the change to disability benefits would do would be to suck millions of pounds out of some of the old industrial regions, because that's where a lot of people with disabilities are. And that's why it does seem to me that there did need to be a rethink. I'm just disappointed because the rethink they've had is that they've effectively kicked the can down the road by saying there'll be this review by Stephen Timms, who's a minister in the DWP. I actually think he's pretty good. I quite like Stephen Timms. I've appeared before him on select committees a couple of times about pensions. But they've kind of, effectively pushed the decisions a bit further down the line. But the other thing they've done is they've said the changes that they had proposed will still apply to anybody making a new claim. And I think that what that does is it reinforces in the public's mind the idea that if you are receiving these benefits, you should never come off them because you'll get something worse. Because, there's effectively a two-tier system now. It's a system for new people and a system for people who are already on benefits. And that feels unfair. And it also, does mean that people just, further entrench this idea that the worst thing that you can do is come off disability benefits.
I think that's a really good point. It's something I hadn't thought of, actually, is that this, exactly what you said, that if the rules are now different for people making claims from this point on, it'll actually incentivise people to stay on them if they're already on them.
Exactly, yeah. And just one final point. One of the numbers that's been repeated quite often in the press is that 1,000 new people a day are claiming PIP. And it's one of those numbers because, as you know, I can be a bit geeky with numbers, and I just thought that can't be right. So I did do a bit of digging, and I think it is right. If anything, I think it's a bit of an underestimate.
1,000 people a day?
Yeah. So numbers I found said that there were 30,000 new PIP claims a month. So on the basis of 30 days a month, that's about 1,000 a day. But that is only England and Wales. So it's not Scotland and not Northern Ireland. And it also excludes people who are not new claims. So, for example, there are some young people who claim children's disability allowance. And then when they reach, I don't know if it's 16 or 18 to be honest, but when they reach adulthood, they moved on to PIP. But that's not in the 1,000 a day because the 1,000 a day is only new claims. So I actually think, if anything, the 1,000 a day is an underestimate, even though to me, I kind of felt that cannot be right. It's perhaps not right on the underside.
I want to read you this something on the BBC article, which is actually a really decent article on this, about the debacle of Parliament.
Yeah.
And it actually compared it to the stuff with Brexit and the stuff with Liz Truss, which is fascinating because both of those, maybe not so much with Liz Truss, I suppose, because she had quite a big majority, but it's just weird now because Labour have got a huge majority, so the fact that they've allowed this to happen is crazy.
Yes.
So the thing in the BBC quoted a Labour MP. It said one of them referring to the rebels who were first elected in 2024. So this is a Labour MP speaking about the rebels that were elected last year as part of that new cohort of Labour MPs. Said, what did they think their job was? They all think they're JFK because they delivered some leaflets while Morgan McSweeney won them the election.
Ooh, ouch. Oh dear.
And I thought, that's amazing, because if that might be a bit tongue-in-cheek, and it's probably not too far of away from the truth of kind of what our modern politics has become, which is, it's very much a national campaign where everybody votes for the party that they want nationally.
Yeah.
And so, if you're a Labour MP, when Labour have an upswing, you have a really good chance, Labour candidate, I should say, you have a really good chance of getting elected and just deliver some leaflets. And it's people like Morgan McSweeney, who's Keir Starmer's chief of staff, that are the people actually making the big decisions. I don't think that's how it should be, though. And I think MPs should be empowered to make the decisions on behalf of their constituents. That's the model we've got. It's just a model that's been completely lost as Number 10 has taken on more and more power. And I actually think something like this that happened last night in the Commons, where there was this big rebellion, I think it's great to be reminded that there is still power in Parliament.
Yes.
And that power can be wielded if they want to.
but
it just can seem very dysfunctional at times.
Yeah, and can I refer the honourable gentleman back to my previous answer that a lot of these regions that would really suffer from the changes are the old Labour heartlands, where some of those new MPs will have come from. So I think that tells you, that's part of the story of why this has all happened.
Yeah.
So, I say, just a quick update. This will keep going because we now have this review by Stephen Timms. So I think they're expecting that to take about a year. So then there will be a further review. So we have to wait and see.
Good stuff. Okay, Glastonbury.
Go on, yes.
So I can't think who it was at Living Freedom that stood up and gave a talk and said, I'm honoured to be here, and I'm just pleased to see that my assumptions are true, that Glastonbury is no longer the place of counterculture, and you're more likely to find it in a room like this. So I'm glad you've decided to be here instead of going to Glastonbury. And I think that's somewhat true. It's Philip Kisley said when we interviewed him that he thought conservatism was now the counterculture.
Yes.
Glastonbury was I'm trying to use less emotive language. I was going to say plagued by Palestine flags, but there were a lot of Palestine flags, which you might expect.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there were any Israeli flags, but I think it would be rather unlikely. And there was a lot of talk in the build-up about this Irish band Kneecap. Have you heard of it, Kneecap?
I do. Yes, I know them. Yeah.
So now I'm not particularly knowledgeable about music, but my guess is that Kneecap are pretty much only famous now because of the controversy surrounding them.
With a lot of people, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, somebody might be listening to this and say, I've been listening to Kneecap for years. I don't know. But I think we lose sight of that when we get lost in the argument that actually this has been very good for them in many ways. And I know that they're being investigated partly for, they say that they didn't do this, but they displayed, supposedly the allegation is that they displayed a Hezbollah flag at one of their gigs. And because that's a proscribed terrorist organisation, it would actually be a criminal act. They've also put up, Free Palestine and some nasty sort of slogans on, as well as that on behind them on the stage.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, they've been thrust into the spotlight because of this, and it actually caused Keir Starmer to comment on their appearance at Glastonbury, saying it's probably not right for them to appear. Glastonbury's organisers have gone ahead with it anyway. But what was interesting is the big controversy was actually before they went on stage, I believe, by this duo called Bob Vylan.
Yeah.
Now, were you familiar with Bob Vylan?
I had heard of them because they're quite big on the festival circuit.
Okay.
So I've never seen them, but they've definitely been on bills.
Our resident music expert.
Indeed, thank
There
you.
we go. So Bob Vylan went on stage, and as well as having a song that a lot of people have taken issue with, after their gig, they did some chants. So they did the normal Free Palestine, and then they did a chant, Death to the IDF. Now, this blew up in the media because, and I said Claire Fox broke the story for us. Now, my position on it is exactly where I think Claire is, which is to say that it's a repulsive, horrible thing to say.
Absolutely.
But they shouldn't be criminally prosecuted for it. So there's been a lot of fallout from this, of course.
Yes.
And just today, I've seen in the news that Bob Vylan was supposed to be playing in Manchester on Saturday, but their gig has been cancelled.
Okay.
And also at a French festival, their gig has been cancelled there. So why I think this is an interesting story is that a lot of the free speech issues recent years have been on the right. If you can call it left and right, of course.
Yeah.
But there was the famous case of Lucy Connolly.
Yes.
Who tweeted about saying people should set fire to hostels with asylum seekers in. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. She also said, "For all I care" at the end, which I think gives you an indication that she didn't fully mean it.
But an equally horrible thing to say.
Equally horrible. Yeah. And you had a lot of people on the right, a lot of media outlets and YouTubers coming out to defend her and say she shouldn't be in prison.
Yeah, which she shouldn't.
And she shouldn't, absolutely. I haven't seen so much of that on this occasion.
No.
And what I think is interesting, and you can see in our binary political debate, you can see a lot of the a lot of you can see in the way that a lot of people have responded to this issue of Bob Vylan coming out and doing these chants, that it kind of falls along party lines, if you like, right? Along the sort of the lines you'd expect. So a lot of people on the left are saying, "Oh, the right aren't so much fans of opposing opposing cancel culture now," and people on the right are saying, "How did the BBC not click onto this more quickly?" Because the BBC let it run.
Yes.
Now,
So it's almost like the right woke and the left woke, isn't it?
yeah, it's weird.
They
Everything's
both very
shifting.
authoritarian. They want speech
Exactly.
cancelled.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much disagreement between us, because I think we both agree that it was an awful thing to say, but
Absolutely.
he shouldn't be criminally prosecuted.
Yeah.
But some of the reactions out there have been stark, I think.
So one thing I would maybe add to your analysis is that, I mean, there's different report backs on this, but my understanding is that actually there was a good section of the crowd who didn't join in with the death to the IDF chants, even though they had joined in with other pro-Palestine chants, which is good. And the other thing is that, I mean, my view is that it's this point I keep making all the time, that we have to take responsibility in those kind of situations. So had I been there, I would have booed. And I actually was at a gig that maybe I'll cover in a culture club in the near future, but I actually was at a gig last weekend where they were coming out with all kinds of Palestine things, and I did boo from the audience. And I know at one point somebody is going to chin me when I do boo, but I think as a free speech absolutist, what that means isn't that you let people say whatever they want and you just nod along and you say, "Oh yeah, yeah." You don't do that. You object. And at one point at this gig I was shouting at the band saying, "Just play your songs, mate." And a lot of people around me were very upset that I said that. But that's what I think you've got to do. You've got to take some responsibility and you've got to say, "I'm not putting up with that. You know, I've come here to enjoy music, not to listen to your pontificating." And I do think it would be a really good way that you could explain to bands like this one that you don't like it is to walk out. And I think that's better than cancelling them. Because I think, you know, showing your displeasure with what they're saying is really important.
So it becomes hard, I think, in today's age to respond to things, because I always use this analogy of, I feel like I'm sort of trapped in the middle between two equally crazy visions of the world, and then you're opposing one side. So in this example, it would be, wow, what an awful thing to say.
Yeah.
And if you're saying death to the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Force, you're basically saying that because they're currently in a war with Hamas, and you're calling for the death of the Israeli soldiers, that is just supporting Hamas.
It is.
And I find that so difficult to understand. And I've been really trying to understand that viewpoint and think, okay, well, people that are chanting these things, or the people in the crowd that got worked up about it, they see it as a genocide, and they think there's innocent lives being lost, and they're trying to oppose who they deem the villains in this situation. I still think it takes such a level of mental gymnastics to stand with Hamas in this conflict. I find that amazing. Even if you think that, you know, there's a lot of innocent lives being lost and you're trying to oppose that, I find that a really difficult thing to get my head around. However, once you go to say that's an awful thing, you then start seeing stories about the criminal prosecution, and suddenly you think, well, wait a second, it is just words.
Yes.
And
Agreed.
I'm sure that, you know, there are a lot of people that will disagree with me and say this is inciting violence. Now, we're not here to discuss what the law is, right? Because that would be quite boring. We're here to discuss what we think it should be.
Yes.
And personally, I don't really. This came up at Living Freedom, and a couple of people were saying, well, I think up to the point where somebody says, right, I am going to go and do this physical act where I'm going to go and hurt somebody, everybody come along and help me. Right, up until that point, there should be free speech. Now, I think at that point, that's not a speech issue. That's a sign that they're about to about to do a crime, and that we have, I'm sure there's already laws about that you can convict somebody for planning to commit murder, for example.
Yeah.
So I think it should fall into that. In terms of inciting violence, if you say something and then somebody goes and does that thing, the blame should be on the person that does the violence, not on the person that has just said words.
I agree. And the whole hate crime structure, I just disagree with in its entirety. We just need to dismantle all that.
So this is a real chance for those of us that have been on the pro-free speech side for all this time.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity seeing somebody that is from that side of the politics, let's say progressive politics, who is now being cancelled and being prosecuted. It's a great chance for us to defend their right to have said it.
Absolutely, it is. And perhaps just to pick up on one thing that you said, just because I don't want anybody to put words in your mouth or to misunderstand what you said. You said some people say innocent lives are being lost.
Innocent
and I think innocent lives are being lost on both sides.
100%, yeah.
So we're not pretending.
What I was trying to do is get into their head and say what they would be saying, and also caveating it with the fact that this is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because of course, if you just say things, you'll get snipped out of context, and then that will be used against you. So
absolutely,
it's a tricky world to operate in.
Indeed, it is.
It?
Yeah. But I'm glad we did that, because it's one of those things that we might well have chickened out of doing. So I'm glad we were brave enough to do that.
Exactly. And it's worth saying as well that I think this is a really important point. We are not, with discussing this, we are not interested in discussing the Israeli-Palestine conflict, because it's irrelevant, right? We're talking about the free speech element of this.
That's right.
Right. And I think what often happens is if you go to defend somebody for using their right to free speech, immediately the retaliation is, yes, but this thing is happening.
Yes.
But I'm not discussing that right now. That's not the thing that we're talking about.
That's right. Yeah. So, quite a short episode, but we've covered quite a lot of ground there, haven't we?
Yeah.
I don't know if people can notice, but we are in our new office now with our new little podcast area. I did notice, Sebastian, that maybe we need to move that plant back, because you've nearly knocked it over a few times.
I move around quite a bit.
You do, yeah. But hopefully the new setup works for you, and we will be back. Perhaps not next week, but the week after, when we have a really fantastic guest to bring to you.
We do, don't we?
So as always, can you please share and recommend us to others? I would really love to grow the number of people watching and listening to us. So please do promote us if you can. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.